Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Power Driven Podcast. Today we have a super interesting episode to maybe someone.
And just not Todd.
We are talking about fuel economy.
Yeah.
Yep.
How to get good miles per gallon when you're towing or driving empty or road tripping, whatever you do in your truck, camping. How do you get the best fuel economy in your new diesel pickup truck?
AKA, for all the slow drivers out there, this one's for you.
You know what? You're just jealous. You haven't gotten more than 15 a day in your life.
15's a good day for me. Like, oh, 15. Woo!
When you make it to Todd's level, it's about smiles per gallon,
That's
not
right.
miles per
Smiles
gallon.
per gallon. I got lots of smiles. And you know, I'm more rating like tires per tank, miles
Yeah.
per tank.
Yeah, no, it's true. I kind of made a decision a long time ago that if I really if you're 1,000 horse and you're worried about your mileage, like you're doing something really right or very wrong.
Yeah.
One of the two.
But the reality is we get a lot of calls from people wanting to figure out how to get a better mileage of their trucks. Fuel gets expensive right now. It's high, but not as high as it's been.
Mm-hmm.
But when it gets high, it becomes a real concern for a lot of people. And we get a lot of questions over it. So we thought, hey, let's have an episode, kind of geared towards mile per gallon. What would you do? So, I mean, there's lots of topics to cover. Maintenance, truck prep, all kinds of things.
Also, if you're like building a high horsepower rig, 600,000, whatever horsepower, like how to keep mileage in mind and what's that going to do to your mileage?
Yeah, for sure. We should go over all of it. I don't even know where to start. Where do you want to start, Myer? What are you thinking we should start?
Let's go over the basics here.
All right.
Okay.
So like a guy gets a truck. What should you just make
What
sure
should you
have?
do? I mean, if you want mileage, the first thing to just go over are the basics. Make sure that your truck is healthy. Does it have good fuel pressure? Is everything working? Is there air filter clean? Is there any boost leaks? Just go over all that. Make sure it's good. The other thing would be like basic stuff. Fill up your tires. Everyone runs around with their tires half full. Like fill up your tires. If you
It
go on a road
rides
trip,
nicer that way.
It does. I am one of those people. I get the best traction with Neo 420s at about 35.
So if you're looking for traction, then the air down is good or a smooth ride. But if you're looking for fuel economy, you want every bump on the freeway to jar your teeth. That is how you get good fuel economy. You ever driven in a old semi?
Oh, yeah.
Oh boy.
So quickly, you talked about boost leaks. That's actually something a lot of people never think about in turbo
yeah.
diesels, and they are very prevalent. Like we made a whole boost leak checker for this very reason because I have boost leaks. I've gone racing with a bolt missing on my intake manifold.
Yeah.
And it still works.
And everyone's like, oh, it doesn't have any boost leaks. Well, how'd you find that out? Well, I can't hear any. That's like congrats. Like there's not like a gaping hole somewhere. However, there's definitely could be like just a leaking clamp or gasket or something like that.
Yeah, for turbo vehicles, it's real, and also exhaust leaks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like in your manifold, you'll see the black soot trails, or maybe you have a very clean.
So if you have soot trails under the hood on your vehicle, you have exhaust leaks. You need to address those. Exhaust leaks kill spool up. They kill fuel economy, and it causes an EGR effect. Your turbo starts sucking in that exhaust, and it's like you're basically doing what the EPA wanted you to do from the day one.
Yeah.
Is kill your engine.
Congratulations. So it's just something I have personally had issues with, and I do know that turbos are all about harnessing excess energy, waste energy, and you want to capture all you can with the good connections and make sure everything works good. So anyway, go on to the basics. Keep going.
So, and then, the other thing I was going to mention is actually this is an example from, I think his name is Gary Ames on the forums. He is a hotshot trucker. Talked to him way back in the day, and he got 300,000 miles out of his factory injectors. Finally, he decided to replace them, and when he did, and he's a hotshot trucker, keeps track of all his mileage, he picked up like 2 miles per gallon just going with new injectors, because those old ones were like EDMing themselves out so far that it wasn't spraying very good anymore. And they like picked up like, I think it was maybe 1.5 gallons or 2 miles a gallon. Just
so
swapping
he
out
paid for that in like a couple of weeks.
Yeah, like he's the kind of guy that like swapped his cam and it paid for himself in like a year.
Wow.
So then in the aftermarket, we do raise the pop pressure on the injectors. And so going higher than OEM does help a little bit of the atomization, speeds up the chatter of the nozzle. And so there are some things, a lot of that in the aftermarket, we weren't targeting fuel economy. We did that. We're trying to make these big injectors run better. But if you get a stock size injector with a little higher pop pressure, it does help if you also advance the timing a little bit. So higher pop pressure retards the timing slightly, which is a penalty unless there's compensation.
We
for
actually
it.
knew people in the past years ago who advertised injectors as a mileage injector, and they decreased the pop pressure. Remember that? They did that because that artificially advances the timing, because it just, it overcomes that pressure earlier. And so you might advance it a degree. And we're like, well, if you just got the right pop pressure and advance it manually, you're the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
So what's the first mod you would do on a truck? Maybe you got to pick a platform, Myer. So let's say it's a common rail.
Common rail?
Yeah, go right to common rail. If you're the first thing you would do if you had bought a truck, you're trying to get fuel economy, what's your number one? Number two, what's your little short list?
I would put a tune in it. If you looked at a factory tune on a common rail, the timing curve is like a bunch of mountain peaks. It's terrible. Like you put a good tune in there, you can get a little more timing. That really, really helps. What else would I do on a common rail?
What does the timing actually do? How is that picking up fuel economy?
Ultimately, if the injection timing is too low, you're not giving the fuel enough time to burn in the cylinder to where it's chasing the piston down, is the terminology for it, where you're not really harnessing that energy. It's kind of just getting half used instead of fully utilized. And so if you can get that fuel in there earlier, you can really help get the full usage out of that burn process. The other part of it is injection pressure. Like some of these newer trucks, like to try to get them to run cleaner and everything else, they're bumping that injection pressure up a bunch. And it seems like the newer the truck is, the higher the factory injection pressure is. And so if you can kind of push that onto the older stuff, you get a little bit better mileage with that as well.
Now, the older platforms, they probably kept the pressure lower. Obviously, the OEMs knew they could get more power mileage. It's probably a reliability thing, but components are better nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
New injectors, even remanufactured ones, are much better than the first ones that came out in 2003 or 2005 or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now
let's high pressure seals.
I want to go back to common rail and tuning, but let's go first mod. It's 12 valve. What would you do?
For me, I mean, timing's a kind of free, but let's say that might be my first mod. But honestly, the way I drive, my first mod would probably be an AFC Live, because I would
because
I'd want to be able to tune it with the switch, to the slow power mode, and otherwise I want that quick power, because otherwise I just go nuts. So for me, I'd like to switch because I could tune a very mild fuel setting with AFC Live, then flip that switch. So for a 12 valve, my first mod would probably be that. But man, timing's right there also.
If you're going for mileage, I feel like, timing, AFC Live's nice because you can get more power out of it.
You got to have driver as part of the equation.
Oh, 100%.
So for me, in timing, I would just tune it aggressive. And so even if timing is there, I drive it in a way that it would get poor mileage. So when I'm part of the equation, I got to have that, because otherwise I'm going to tune it for power.
So I've done quite a bit of testing and tuning fuel economy. I was one of those nerds back in the day that chased every mile per gallon, and timing definitely helps. It's also highly dependent on your cruising RPM. If you have 410 gears and you live in Utah and you don't have a lift kit and big tires, so you're turning, let's say 2,800 RPM down the highway, because you're probably driving 100. Welcome to Utah. You need a lot more timing than if you're in California with 355 gears on your lifted, Cali lean truck with a 37s. You don't need nearly as much time when you're cruising down the highway at 1,200 RPM versus 2,800. So it's highly dependent. But I would say in general, I've never ever had a 12 valve lose fuel economy by advancing the timing more than the stock setting. Mm-hmm. So the stock setting is too low. In fact, you get in a Cummins Marine application.
Yeah.
Their timing's up there in the 20-degree range on a boat where they had no, they're a little bit higher RPM engines, a little bit higher power. They could run anytime they want. Fuel efficiency is very important on a boat. You run out of fuel, you're kind of stuck. Big deal. There's not a lot of gas stations. And guess where Cummins decided to set the timing on most marine engines? Between like 20 and 22 degrees. Mm-hmm. Why?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was obviously more efficient, as well as the fact that those marine applications, they're running high RPM. Like, what are they? I don't even know where they sit at. Where are they
2,800, a lot of is the
2,800,
26, 2,800. Yeah. So as your RPM's higher, even the factory knows you need more timing. But I get lots of guys call and they're like, oh, I don't want to set my timing at 20. That's scary. And I'm like, go buy a Cummins Marine engine. They set it at 22 for you.
Just install that.
Yeah. And they put a however many 1,000-mile warranty or a couple 1,000-hour warranty on it. So no, you need some timing there.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I really, really noticed when I was playing with different things on 12 valves is the exhaust really is, it's just a big pumping loss. So freeing up the exhaust flow really helps. So obviously the 4-inch exhaust is great, but the biggest restriction is the factory turbo and turbine housing.
Yeah, when they went to the second gen Dodge, they changed that turbine housing from was it a 19 centimeter to a 12 centimeter?
There was 21 and then 18 when they went to
21.
overdrive. So it was 21 when it was
the original
non-overdrive.
first gens were 21. Yeah, when they weren't in overdrive.
So they dang near cut it in half, 21
yeah.
to 12. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not like, it's like that, but still,
Yeah, it was terrible.
I mean, the response was nice. People like the response.
Oh yeah.
Makes it way more peppy for sure. But, the highest mileage diesel trucks were those early first gen Dodges. Those are like the kings of, 20 miles per gallon, like no big deal. I do it all day long every day.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has to do with that free flowing exhaust, like the pumping losses you're talking about. So if you open that up, like, for us, that's one of the reasons like that 6064 turbo is because we put a bigger turbine wheel in it.
So
And-
that Aggressor 6064
Yeah.
is a great, I mean, that's probably one of the first mods I do because it frees up the exhaust flow, but it also gives you that EGT control,
Yeah.
which
It's kind of
makes,
added bonus. Also, on the note of freeing up the exhaust, that's another common thing. Factory trucks built after January of 94, have a cat in there. And if you're driving really, really easy, trying to like get good mileage, you'll gum that thing up, create a restriction, and your mileage will go to crap. And then you just gotta like drive it like you stole it every once in a while, just to burn that thing out, to be able to clean it out and get that good mileage again.
Yeah. The exhaust systems is a big deal. I mean, air intakes as well. I mean, any more restriction you have to moving air through that engine is a problem for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So any more truck prep, like
So,
things you would do to
I want to go back to Will. Like when you guys are doing that DV or that injector testing, we're not taking a stock truck trying to make more mileage. We're trying to make a stock truck make 400 horse or so and not lose any mileage or even make it better.
Yeah.
And that's how the 055 came about.
yeah. So when there's a lot of different delivery valves. So in a 12 valve in the P pump, there's a valve in the pump that basically shuts the fuel. It's kind of like a fancy check valve in there. And bigger delivery valves deliver more fuel, but they have a tremendous penalty on fuel economy when they get really big. And so that's kind of where the 055 delivery valve came about that we sell for towing applications and fuel economy. It's a solid delivery valve compared to like a 025, which 025 is a great delivery valve, but it might be a mile and a half per gallon loss with the 025 versus the 055.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I like. The delivery valve's job is to end the injection event cleanly. And the bigger the injector you have, the bigger DV you can get away with. But you get these people that are trying to run a 5x12, which is a great mileage injector, small bump, or like a power-driven stage 1 power jet, whatever. You pair that with an 025, it's not really ending that injection event that cleanly. And that's where if you pair it with an 055, it's able to have basically very similar manners to stock with that bigger injector, but deliver a little bit more fuel when you get into it.
I know talking with Lenny Rita at Dynamite Diesel, he's a big proponent of controlling the end of injection.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Everybody talks about like when the injection starts, and he's like, people don't realize how important the ending event is as well, especially in the common rail.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So
That's where like a lot of injector technology has happened. Like of the injector technology that's happened the last couple of years in common rails, a lot of it is the end of injection.
yeah. And it has paid off because like, I know we talk about it all the time, but my mega cab, what it can do with the power it makes and how clean it runs and the amazing mileage it gets.
I want someone else to drive that thing just to prove you wrong.
What's your average fuel economy on your daily
driving
driver
empty.
/ tow truck? Driving empty, not even towing.
I occasionally check.
Okay.
And my best tank ever in that thing's about 15.
Ooh.
Yeah, so it's not terrible. And that was after the new engine build when I did the Total Seal rings and you gave me that sweet head so it flows better. And get like a nice Colt cam in there. So I did a few things engine-wise. I didn't do any of it for mileage. But hey, I'll tell you, before that, I was like maybe 13 and a half.
Yeah, so like 2 years ago, I towed you back from like Salt Lake and I got high 14s towing you back. And that was the best mileage his truck has ever gotten.
Towing it.
What? It was cheaper to have me drive him home than him to drive himself.
It took forever.
No, that was 80, 85. I don't slow down.
How's that even possible? I don't get.
I don't know. Your truck sucks. I don't know what to tell you. Or the driver. I don't know which one it is.
Yeah, I have to think it has more to do with the person behind the wheel.
So there's a whole myriad of parts and things you can put on your truck, that help a little bit with fuel economy. But I mean, the big gains, honestly, are we haven't even talked about tires yet. I mean,
Oh yeah.
you put like I used to have a 9924 valve, and my best economy ever. I was living here in Utah, and I had to drive back to Washington State for college. And one day I was like, you know what? I'm going to see how good a mileage I can get driving home. So I set my cruise at 64 miles per hour. This was a 5-speed manual 4x4, 64 miles an hour. And at that time, I think the speed limit was 75 through Montana. They hadn't raised it to 80 yet. So all the Idaho, Montana, back through Montana and Idaho again. Anyway, 64. I got 24.6 miles per gallon.
Jeez.
Oh my gosh. I've never gotten that good.
And that was basically a stock truck I had RV 275 injectors, which is a factory injector for an RV application. So slightly bigger injector. I had a Quadzilla box, putting a little bit of timing in there, little air intake, 4-inch exhaust. And it had these Michelin 265 tires, which those Michelin have really low rolling resistance. I had them aired up really hard. I mean, your teeth rattled out of your face every bump. And I actually made it home in about the same amount of time as I normally do, because I didn't have to stop for fuel. I didn't have to stop for Diet Cokes or candy bars, which means I didn't have to stop to use the restroom, which means that 12-hour drive took 12 hours and I saved a whole bunch of fuel. Now, I couldn't handle that. The next time I drove, I was just like, screw this. But the whole point of the story is the way you drive has a huge impact.
Oh, yeah.
The tires, what was amazing on that whole truck, after that, I wanted bigger tires. So what I do? Put some 35-inch buckshot mutters on them, and little 2-inch leveling blocks. Cause I was a poor college student. That's all you could, just the minimum to get the tires on there. After those tires on there, I never, ever saw above 17 miles per gallon on that truck, no matter what I did. So raising that nose up, putting a little bigger tire, and I'm smart. I calculated the odometer, cause obviously a bigger tire spins slower. And so I would actually there's all kinds of levels there. It didn't matter the speed, that killed mileage. So if you want fuel economy and you have this beautiful lift kit and these beautiful stancy wheels and mud tires, I'm telling you, a Michelin low rolling resistance, boring grandpa tire is where it's at. And 265 is important. That's a little bit taller tire. It helped drop my cruising RPM at 64. I mean, I haven't even calculated the cruising RPM. It was probably like 1,700,
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Probably way down there.
In fact, you do a lot with 68 RP transmissions. Overdrive ratio is better on them now.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Why do you think the factory did that?
Oh yeah. For mileage, for sure. I mean, the 68s have a dual overdrive, and it really helps. Like, I did some testing on a trip I was doing. I was towing a gooseneck trailer. I get like mid-9s ish towing the gooseneck with a truck on there. And I did a test. I was like, well, I wonder what happened. Like, I tow in 6th gear everywhere, 80 miles an hour, 6th gear cruise control. It takes care of it. I was like, well, I wonder if I drop the RPM down, because that's like with the double overdrive, that's about 1900 RPM. I was like, well, I wonder if I drop it down a gear, get a little bit more RPM, a little less load on the engine, a little bit more speed. Maybe that'll pick up mileage, whatever. So I did a full tank like that. And that's the only time I've gotten like I think it was 7.4 going the same 80 miles an hour. So I was like, nope, 6th gear it is. Everyone's like, don't tow in 6th. I was like, well, I'm doing it anyway.
So the RPM hurts you on most applications.
And like, that's even, I mean, that was on I-15, and there's a good amount of grades there. So you're pulling, I mean, like cruise control, 6th gear, like it was doing some pretty good pulling. I mean, up past like 40 pounds of boost just to try to keep it maintained. I was like, that's where I thought maybe 5th gear would be better because it wouldn't have to work as hard. Nope. Definitely worth it.
Interesting.
The whole combination of parts makes a difference. I've noticed when they're not always the same. I used to have a 12 valve that I had to drive to California a lot. And
I don't want to cut you off too much, but I just realized, I don't know if I said, in 5th gear, I was at 2,400 RPM. So it was from 1,900 RPM to 2,400 RPM. So it wasn't like a huge, like 2,800 RPM swing. It was just 19 to 24.
That amount.
Yeah, it was weird.
Well, that's my problem with my 4-speed. I'm cruising the road 2,500 RPM everywhere I go.
Because you're going 85.
So you could,
87.
so from what we've seen, when your RPM is high, it's more important to actually have bigger turbos and freer exhaust. So I would argue that your big racing compounds probably get better fuel economy at 2400 than
if I had a stock turbo, it'd be so restrictive at that speed, especially with the big head and cam I got because it's moving so much. It'd back it up like crazy. And so, the 467 seems to work pretty well. Like, honestly, for that truck, cruising at 85 ish, we'll say,
the speed limit always, of course.
Yeah.
Anyway, at the speed limit.
If I was smaller, it would be bad for sure. I like it.
Yeah, my shorty. So that's a 410 5.9 common rail truck, and I would get
410 gear ratio.
Yeah, 410 gear ratio. So, and I would, if I don't road trip that thing a lot, but when I did, I would be 80, 85. Like, it was about 2,500 RPM, I think, around there with 32s. And I would get like 16s. Like, that was it. And truck. I had a 351, a stock 351 on the manifold, and so it was a blast. It like promoted road rage so bad because like you were just like, it was like half spooled all the time. It would be just like cruising down the highway at like 10 15 pounds of boost. Like, you punch it, like I timed it, like if I punch it at 70 in a second and a half, I was going 90.
In Mexico.
In Mexico, yes. And so like it would promote road rage. I could like get around anyone. I could drive
in America,
like a little car.
It's probably a similar spool time, but you're not certain.
Yeah, I've never tested in the States.
So we're talking a little bit about driving technique in general. There's obviously differences. So we can talk about ways that like Todd drives to get poor mileage and ways
the proper way.
that I mean, so what do you think your worst tank of fuel is ever in your tow truck, Myer?
My tow truck,
street truck.
So the worst tank of fuel I've ever gotten for sure is the Shorty's first tank I ever put through it after I common rail swapped it. I was trying to break in the motor. I got 4.3 miles a gallon.
Oh,
it was pretty rough, but hey, I had a great time. Probably the most fun
Favorite tank of your life.
Yes, for sure. Best mileage I've ever gotten. I don't pay super great attention to it. I don't think I've ever recorded more than like mid 18s.
even empty.
Even empty, yeah.
Wow.
The best tank I've ever gotten was actually in my wife's excursion, the 6-liter PowerStroke, and it was going between Junction, Colorado to Denver through that that twisty road all over there. And you're like, how would you do that? You're gaining elevation. Well, it's a slow speed limit, and it's busy, and I couldn't go much more than 65 miles an hour because of traffic, and I got like 18 and a half on that tank, and
wow,
and so that's a big thing. Whole family in tow. On that tank, I pushed it, and I think I got almost 800 miles on that tank.
800 miles?
Because it's like a 44-gallon tank. It wasn't quite, but it was over. It was like 7.5, and it's like, all right, I better pull over. But so that was the one time I did that, and it's because I didn't have the choice.
I mean, my super 64 mile per hour trip I was telling you about, I got 760 miles on a tank. That was in a short bed
Smaller
Dodge
tank.
Ram, small tank. But that's all. I made it home without stopping for fuel. I didn't have anywhere else to go, but that's pretty good. So that's my best mileage. My worst mileage, when I had my junker drag truck, I had some Wrangler, like Goodyear Wrangler, those Kevlar sidewall tires, and I was trying to make them into slicks for drag racing because I couldn't afford slicks, and they were half worn out. And so during that tank of fuel, I turned some 33-inch, mud tires into slicks and raced them a little bit. And I didn't have a working fuel gauge, and I ran out of fuel on the way home from the track. The only time I've ever ran out of fuel. And I was right at the elementary school by my house in Las Vegas, and I just pulled in there and and it was close enough I actually could walk home. I walked home and got a tank of fuel, and my wife was just like, what the heck's wrong? I was like, I ran out of fuel. And she's like, you ran out of fuel? You never ran out of fuel. And I was like, well, I thought I could go because the odometer was working. Well, I had gotten less than 11 miles per gallon because that's what I was like. Oh, I got another few miles. So I don't know because I topped it off, but it's probably around 10 miles per gallon. But hey, miles per gallon, you melt down a whole set of tires.
Yeah.
Lots of smiles.
I want to get back to like parts people might want to use for mileage, or if they want power, how to get mileage, how to compromise. Obviously, are all big fans and all have compound turbos.
Mm-hmm.
We love them. They make power. They're awesome. Are they the play for mileage?
So that is a trick, in my opinion. I don't think any of us here are like experts on the field, but my opinion is that if you have a just commuter that's just empty all the time, maybe cut some stuff in the bed, I don't know that compounds are the way unless you're really working your truck, like pulling, like going up to Bryan Head or something, you know, steep grades where you're actually working your truck. Because I mean, you do have to pump air through 2 turbos and both intake and exhaust. And yeah, you get some energy out of them when you get going. But if you're flat grounding, it is a little bit of a restriction. I don't think you're gonna get quite as good a mileage with compounds unless they're like sized like super perfectly for mileage. I could get that maybe, but it's like not a good running set of compounds you'd want on a 400 horse truck. Now, if you are a work truck towing a trailer everywhere, that's when now you're cruising down the road at 150 whatever horsepower, whatever it is, or you're pulling grades at 300, 400, whatever it is. That's where mileage is going to go up a lot with
because
compounds.
the leaner you make it burn, you're going to get more energy out of that amount of fuel you're putting in there.
Because yeah, if you're coasting down the road at 50 horsepower, that big turbo is really not into its peak. It's not even like working that hard. It's just a restriction at that point. And so you kind of just got to decide what you're using the truck for. If it's a flat grounder, single turbo might get you better mileage. But if it's like around here where it's just everything's either uphill or downhill, you might get better mileage with compounds because that when that truck's working, you can get it to run leaner, and the leaner you go, the cleaner, the better mileage, the more efficient it's going to be.
Yeah, in the drag racing world, I don't know if I'm sure they have, but they've gone to the limits of basically every AFR ratio they can measure. And the leaner they go, the more power they make. Like they're talking, 30 to 1?
I think they're up around 40 to 1 now. They'll still go.
Pick up power.
I mean, but the gain is so small from 30 to 1. It's like not even worth the nitrous they're doing, but there is still gain until you're squeaky lean.
The only way they can get that lean is with nitrous. You're not even doing that with turbos. Compound turbos included.
There's not enough exhaust energy to drive the turbos to cause that.
But it does illustrate the point that the leaner you can make it, the more energy you will extract from a given amount of fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why
if you're using a bunch of exhaust energy and backing up the turbine or backing up the exhaust of the engine to get that lean, it goes both ways.
Pumping losses for sure.
Yeah. So you gotta just.
In my experience, every time I've put compound turbos on one of my trucks that had a good match single turbo, they lost fuel economy in an empty cruising state. The only place that now towing, that's different. Towing. I felt like I gained towing fuel economy with small compounds, especially if you're at like low RPM. The only place I think compounds could be to single turbo, even empty, is if for some reason you're cruising at like 12 or 1300 RPM. You're so far where you're not making any boost. If there's no boost going in the engine, one time I had a little bit bigger than stock set of injectors. They're like a Marine, they're a 4-hole injector. And my truck got better fuel mileage at 75 miles an hour than it did at 65, which was baffling to me. But I noticed at 65, it was making 2 pounds of boost, and there's a light haze coming out the tailpipe. And at 75, it was clean, but it was cruising at about 5 pounds of boost. And that engine with those big injectors needed the extra boost to clean up. And so if you're so, low speed crawling somewhere, that's where the compounds are going to help. But if you're at, let's say 2000 RPM, I don't think compounds, unless they're as big as like yours, like on your truck, for example, your power level, I think compounds are way better fuel economy than a big single turbo. Yeah. So it depends on the application, but for like most people towing and hauling, 500 horse or less.
Yeah. Like an example of that would be Josh McCormick. So he did a trip out east back when he worked here, and he dynoed his truck here, then went out to Firepunk and dynoed his truck there and towed a D&J engine all the way back. But he had, I think it was a 472, 488 compounds on his truck. That could be the truth, or it could be a 480 GT55. I think it was the 472, 488. And he got like low 20s. And he's not a racer. Like if he's headed somewhere, he's not in a hurry, he's going the speed limit. And so that's kind of where it worked out for him. That was a 3rd gen 07 48 truck, 373s, and he got low 20s, and that is a 1300 horsepower truck. Like so
it is possible.
It's very possible. And if you get that free flowing exhaust, I mean, I guarantee he's cruising at like a couple pounds of boost. But that's also a difference between a common rail and a 12 valve. 12 valves really need boost in order to run clean and be efficient. Like their NA performance is not great, whereas a common rail better head technology, injection technology, whatever it is. Optimization. Their NA performance is good enough that
when he says NA, he's meaning naturally aspirated.
Very
low boost, almost no turbo boost going.
It's good enough in that situation that it doesn't need much, if any, boost to be able to burn efficiently. And so that really open, free flowing exhaust that was making a couple pounds of boost was probably doing really good for him.
Yeah. Great. Keeps the pumping losses low.
But you try to tow with that where you now need that performance.
At that
was
RPM.
472, like it's not going to tow that great because it's not happy at that RPM.
I mean, another example, I have a Ford EcoBoost. I have a 2019 Ford EcoBoost and empty.
That's a 3.5 liter twin turbo.
3.5 liter twin turbo gas engine, and empty. I'm getting 18, 19. I think I have one tank at 20 miles per gallon with it.
Hand calculated?
Hand calculated.
Damn.
Towing, that's empty on the highway. Driving into work every day, keep my foot in it. It's more like about a 15 mile per gallon truck, which is one better than my 5.3 LS Trailblazer. So, I mean, go forward. But put a trailer behind that thing, I can barely get 10 miles per gallon putting my little car hauling trailer and not even as heavy as my race car. I'm talking like 5,000 pounds. That thing struggles to get 10 miles per gallon. And so that little engine, obviously the OEMs have shrunk the engine looking for fuel economy, turboing it to get the power they need. And at light cruise, the engine is phenomenal. It's better than the V8 Ford gas engines. But when behind a trailer, everybody's finding that Coyote 5 liter V8 makes better fuel economy when it's worked hard towing a trailer. And so it's all dependent on how you're exactly using the truck.
I wonder, those turbos I know are really small and they choke up fast. I wonder if you could free the exhaust side, if that would change it. I'd be very curious.
I mean,
because they're tiny.
Only one way to know.
It's all, as far as I know, it's stock. So it's got all the factory restrictions it could possibly have in it. So
I'll have to play with that. I'll let you guys know.
So I feel like we're moving right into the next topic, and that is 6.7 versus 5.9 versus like a 6.1. Which one gets better mileage?
I think the OEMs have proven to us the smaller engine that can get the job done as long as it's not overworked and loaded is more fuel efficient.
You have less friction. You have less everything else.
I mean, one of the biggest frictions in the engine is the rings dragging up and down in the bores. And so if you have a 6.7, you have more surface area of ring touching. If you have a longer stroke,
it's being stroked further. Yeah.
If you have a longer stroke, you're stroking the piston further. So I would argue the 5.9 absolutely is the best fuel economy engine you could have.
Yeah. And I think if you do the math there, like, a bigger piston's, pressure in the cylinder, it's going to be able to have more actual force going down, as well as the more stroke, it's more leverage on the crank. The problem with that is you have more displacement. That means that whatever fuel you put in there, it's not going to make as big of a pressure burn, a pressure spike when it actually burns. And so it kind of negates itself, and it goes down to how much friction is in that motor. And that's your 3.5 example is perfect. It's the best mileage F-150 engine that you can get, flat grounding. You put it behind a trailer.
Well, they have many engines, but yes,
Okay.
they have a 3 liter diesel engine that kills that. But,
okay,
but
gas to gas.
But between that and the V8, that's in the 2 powerhouse engines. That's more efficient than the V8 5 liter V8.
And it's probably swinging this huge RPM. It's just not happy. It's having to lean on those turbos. Like,
yeah, and when the turbos are pumping that air in there, there's way more choke on the exhaust side because now that exhaust side has to process twice as much horsepower worth of air. And
so, all right. Sorry, make your point. Then I'm going to go somewhere else. Go ahead.
Okay. What about 5.9 versus 6.7? What about 6.1? Where does that fit into that?
So there's 2 factors to that. If they were the same compression ratio, I would say the 6.1 would lose. We've found in everything that compression ratio increases the efficiency of the engine. And so due to that compression ratio increase on the 6.1, I'm going to say at worst, it's a wash. It might be better with the 6.1, even with the slight extra friction of dragging the piston up and down further. That big compression ratio bump is huge.
So I'm going to use probably a terrible example, but I think it's pretty cool. My dad's dually. So he brought it up here. He drove it up here. It had a manual 5-speed in it, and it was a bone stock. AFC was never touched. It was 200 or 150,000 miles, something like that. Never touched. Went to go put a head gasket in it. Ended up just doing a whole engine build because the cylinders looked a little washed. Anyway, after it was all said and done, we put a 6.1 stroker in it. Compounds, it's like a power jet injector, just the whole shebang. The next time he came up, he got 1 miles per gallon better. So he went from 17 to mid 18s. And I don't think that was a set of compounds. We made some changes since. I think it's hopefully going to be better again. But from bone stock to a mid 700 horsepower truck, he picked up power. And we did a cam, we did a head, we did a lot of different things. So you can't really put it on any one specific thing. But it's pretty cool to see from bone stock to 700 horse, you're gaining mileage.
Yeah, that's pretty dang cool.
Mm-hmm. And what was that engine that we did for, or not engine, but the build we did for Project Farm? That Todd, he came and he recorded his mileage. We threw some timing, a little bit, a small injector, DV bump, 055 DVs, and we put a
power jet injectors and that aggressor
6064, so a freer flowing turbine. And he picked up mileage too. I forget what he picked up. It was at least 1 miles per gallon though. And he had a 410 truck. And so his RPM. I
think his text is like 1.5. It was like just under 2, 1.5, 2.
Yeah.
He was very impressed with it.
Very impressive. Yeah. And he has a 410 truck. So he's swinging more RPM. So like that bigger turbine is definitely helping him out a little bit, but he doesn't strike me as a racer. Like he was probably going the speed limit the whole way.
Well, he did have his college age son with him, and so the college son's like, yeah, I got into it. This thing gets.
Yeah, and that was that left at like a 500 horse setup.
Yeah,
from a bone stock truck. So that was pretty cool as well.
Yeah. So I was thinking about your earlier comment about the hot shotter. I forget his name, but he had
I want to say Gary Ames.
Yeah. So those guys put a ton of miles on their truck, and they're going to end up rebuilding an engine.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say he comes to us or comes to you and says, "Hey, I got this old hot shot truck. I put crazy miles on it. I want to build a motor and I want to make power, but specifically fuel mileage is very important to me."
Yeah.
How are you going to build that motor? I'm going to start with you, Will. You're kind of our engine guru over here.
I mean, first thing, absolutely going to put a toe ported head on there because you're freeing up pumping losses on the exhaust side, especially making less boost because he's going to be working it hard is going to free up some restriction there as well. The turbo shouldn't have to work as hard if it doesn't have to raise the pressure ratio as much.
That also in turn means that so your intercooler doesn't work as hard because you're not making as much heat from compressing the air. Yeah. There's a lot of benefits from dropping boost by a higher flowing head.
Yeah, that's like a twofold thing when you're towing. Like if you can drop boost by moving more airflow through the engine, that's a bonus there. As well as you drop boost, you put less heat into the intercooler, which means now your radiator is more capable of cooling, and so now you got better towing capacity, pulling grades and stuff. You're not going to overheat your truck as fast. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
So that getting right into the engine, I think if I was a hot shotter, I would do a stroker, a 6.1 stroker, just because it's going to get the turbos going better. It's just, especially if he's loaded heavy, it's going to give him a little extra torque. That compression ratio is going to really help. The ring wall finish, he wants reliability, so you need that extreme plateau hone. And then the good valleys to hold the oil there. I mean, the cylinders are so much smoother now with these new honing tech. Drag. Yeah, less ring drag. I mean, like even the honing head itself, there's 6 stones on there now, or 6 diamonds instead of 4. It makes a rounder bore. You have better ring seal. So all that stuff kind of comes into play there on the engine. The other thing is we're going to put a mild camshaft in there. Factory cams are great, but there's a little bit of room for improvement there.
Yeah, if you're taking the old cam out, if you're gonna put another one in, put a aftermarket one in there. Just a small bump. You won't get into any like you start getting big like a 1.8 220. You start losing bottom end performance. But like a mild was it a Colt Stage 3 Hamilton 178 208?
You're like a little Colt Big Stick are great. And once again, it depends. If he was in California and he's towing at low speed, I would put our budget builder cam, because that's a Cummins designed cam that's a little bit bigger than stock, but it's smaller than all those. That's going to work better in that lower RPM range, where all of those other cams kind of miss that, let's say 12 to 1500 RPM range. But if he's anywhere outside of California where he's going to be, have a little more mild, I guess there could be other states with low speed limits. That's one I'm familiar with low towing speed limit. He's going to want this bigger cam because, he's going to be turning 2000 RPM, and especially as a hot shotter, me grabbing third gear on the hills now getting into, let's say, a modern hot shotter that's probably going to have a common rail engine and not a 12 valve.
Yeah.
Once again,
head, same thing.
You're going to want a tow port on there. Yeah. You need to free up that that engine. And beyond
There's a
that,
lot of room in the exhaust and those common rail heads. It's very easy to pick up the flow there.
yeah, and there's no penalty there. All that is pumping loss. You get that exhaust free flowing, lets all that energy hit the turbine and do what it needs to do.
Yeah, and then also on the newer trucks, the turbine side on the comm rails is way undersized to try to get pressure to build up there for reasons that we don't really care about anymore. Opening up that turbine side, putting a bigger turbine into it. Don't throw like a S400 or S300 on like a 5.9 truck. Just a stock modified. You keep a lot of the driving characteristics while freeing up that turbine a lot. It's really going to help.
In the common rails, we have that 67 millimeter turbine wheel.
Yeah.
And we pair that with a 60 or 62 for towing, and it works really, really well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
What about, I say camshaft upgrade? We had a question on that specifically from when we talk about the EGR and the third gen camshafts, like how that works.
Oh really? So
he's curious how it works.
So long and short of it is they put a very small turbine on the turbine side of the turbo. And so that builds up a lot of back pressure. And so now it's...
And we're talking about 2003 through 2007.
Yep.
But the bad cam started in 04.5. That made it even worse.
Yeah. And so that's ultimately what they did is they put made it so there's a bunch of pressure on the backside of the engine. And then they had a cam with a bunch of overlap to try to get that exhaust to make its way back in the intake to ultimately EGR itself.
So on cams, they talk about a lobe separation angle. That's the center of the peak of the intake lobe and the exhaust lobe. The lobe separation angle is very narrow on that, narrower than any other Cummins application by 4 to 5 degrees, 6 degrees, depends which cam you're comparing it to. Where in the aftermarket, they separate in fact, the only time they do tight load separation, I've never seen a cam with that tight of lobe separation angle, even on gas stuff. Like it's just it's not normal. They're trying to make it EGR in cylinder by basically leaving the exhaust valve open when the intake's open. The exhaust pressure is higher than the intake boost pressure because of that small turbine. So you're basically forcing exhaust and then soot back around the intake valve into the intake tract. Then once the exhaust valve closes, it puts that exhaust mixed intake air charge into the cylinder to cause that in-cylinder EGR effect.
Which is kind of a bonus for us because that 9-centimeter housing spool is really good.
Yeah.
Throw a bigger turbine in it and it works really well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's true. That large turbine wheel, it's a great combination.
I'll bet Holset had no idea we were going to do that years ago.
I can only think that Cummins engineers are like, what the are these guys doing? Like, this is impossible.
Wait, you're using this emission part for performance? Yep.
Absolutely. What else do you do engine-wise? Let's talk about, so compression ratio is a big deal. Is there any other thing that you talk about cams? What about like top end stuff, springs, push rods? Like, do you think there's any benefit in any of that kind of stuff?
So at the surface level, there's a small benefit if you can't change the cam because either you don't want to or it's too deep of a job or whatever. A stiffer push rod translates that cam motion to the valves better. So bigger push rods are an advantage. I saw small fuel economy bumps tightening up my valve lash tighter than factory spec. I mean, it's minute. It's like a 1/4 mile per gallon. But if you're trying to get everything, make sure at least adjusted to spec. But you can go a little tighter. You can go to about 6 thousandths on the intake, and you can go to about 15 on the exhaust safely on your valve lash on a 12 valve. 24 valve. How tight have you gone, Myer? Have you ever gone much?
I've never played. I've done a lot of tight lash stuff on 12 valves. I've never actually tried that on common rails. I've always the tightest I've gone is like 8 and 18.
So basically factory.
Yeah.
But yeah, the push trains are there. The valves.
You say you saw a small mileage increase. I did push rods only on the exhausts of my 12 valve because that's all we had in stock at the time. And I saw EGT decrease. So that valve is closing or
opening quicker,
opening more, or whatever change is happening. It dropped my EGTs around like 100 or so. Like it's obviously kind of hard to like really say, but like I've towed with that truck. That was my tow truck at the time. I towed with it quite a lot, and definitely dropped it at least a noticeable amount. It's hard to quantify, but very noticeable.
Yeah, the reality is everything in the world flexes and moves. Nothing's perfect, and so your exhaust valve has to open up into an incredibly high pressure environment. It's opening up against that combustion pressure.
Yeah.
And so
everyone thinks that the exhaust valve's opening when it's all the way down, when the piston's all the way down. It's not. I think it's like, this is numbers from a long time ago, but I think it's like it's 40 degrees before the piston's all the way down.
You want
Around
that,
there.
You want that blowout pressure.
That's a
You actually
lot of
want
pressure.
the pressure to hit the turbine. So
In fact, they call that the blow down phase. So
Yes.
you have big cylinder pressure still.
Yeah. It's time to open against that. You get any kind of deflection and it's just not going to open as much. It's not going to open as crisp, as clean, and it's not going to hit that turbine.
yeah. So everything you design a can to do one thing, and then you neuter it with a push rod. So it's something to think about anyway.
And in the gas world, they found small horsepower losses with heavier valve springs, heavier than you need. But you need those heavy exhaust springs on the exhaust side for exhaust brake use or things like that. So I would say no to valve springs without push rods, and or at a minimum, at least on the exhaust if you're doing that. But yeah, push rods are cheap. It's not. I mean, you kind of do it all at the same time if you're in there, most guys. But
Yeah, definitely.
So we're thinking a stroker, ported head, high compression would be nice. Push rods, valve springs. Definitely not a third gen factory cam, maybe a little one cam.
Yep.
One of the new things that's kind of come out recently is the total seal piston rings. You know, like the blow by goes way down. Do we believe that capturing energy? I mean, in my truck, I picked up mileage, but that's not the only change I made. So I can't say, oh, they are the reason. But I definitely, with this new build, I get better mileage than I did in my past build.
What all did you change though? I mean, you have a little bit better head on there now.
I went to a Colt Stage 4 cam from the 188 220 Hamilton. We did the head on it before was good, but with our newest stuff that Will figured out, he kind of put the end of his head, and so
flow similar, more swirl.
Yeah, more swirl, similar flow, but better swirl.
Nice.
And so you'd say the cam's slightly different, but very close.
Yeah.
And the big difference on the total seal rings, obviously they seal better, so you only have as much combustion energy to work with as the fuel you put in there to burn. So anything that goes by the rings is a waste. It just goes in the bottom end, makes crankcase pressure, which causes windage losses, and you're just losing that force. So the better seal on the ring is the big help. They also have special coatings on them that is also helping the rings to seal and reduce friction. And so there's another advantage in the total seal from a friction loss and the sealing. So it's like a double whammy benefit. But you need a good
hone,
extreme plateau hone, or you're going to wear the coating off the rings and break it.
During break-in, it'll just be gone.
So,
so that's
Total Seal has a lot of good info they've kind of published on that.
Yeah.
And obviously I bought it hook, line, and sinker, but in your testament, it works.
Yeah.
What about the golf ball dimples? Are you lining up to dimple your pistons?
I haven't tested that. I just would say I'm a non-believer without any data to back it up. How's that?
I just call myself a cautious skeptic,
Yeah.
not cautiously optimistic. I'm skeptical because I feel like if it was as good as their advertising, OEMs would have snatched it up and bought them out. I mean, these guys think their company's worth a couple $1 million. And OEM's like, shoot, for less than $1 billion, yeah, we'll buy it. So if it was really that good, but
they come with the total seal rings, don't they?
Yeah, they come with the total seal gapless rings. I'm like, dude, you got two different.
So who knows? Yeah,
they're very expensive. We've had many people ask, "Hey, why don't you test these?" I'm like,
because I don't want to.
$500 for a set of $800 pistons with a set of $300 rings in them.
Yeah.
With some dimples, that's what's hard. They are coating the crowns. There's a little thermal efficiency they're gaining. That's something you could do that we haven't really played with a lot. Is anything you do to keep the heat, in the cylinder not get absorbed.
Yeah.
There's kind of like a third rule they have, where a third of the fuel you're burning is doing work pushing the piston down. A third is going out the tailpipe and exhaust heat energy, and a third is going in the cooling system. So if you can do a ceramic or thermal coating on your piston so that less heat is absorbed into the oil, which ultimately ends up in the cooling system, there's some small, benefit there.
Okay. I think the last part I want to talk about is fueling and components, specifically like injectors and stuff.
Yeah.
Like I'm at my heart, I'm a call it a farmer, a cheap person. Like my first build made 700 horsepower and I did not have a lot of money into the truck, but I love like playing around, trying to do things for cheap and, trying new ways of doing stuff. Fueling components is where I draw the line. You get a good set of injectors, they just run so much better. They start so much better. They get better mileage. They haze way less. I'm huge about haze. I hate, like, if my truck hazes at all in town, I hate it. Like I'll drive it however I need to make it so I don't smoke out anyone in town. And so if I have a cleaner set of injectors, that means I can also use more power driving around in town, and I can use more power just cruising on the highway, wherever it is. I don't have to downshift because I'm starting to haze or something. And you get good injectors, good fueling.
Now
components.
you're talking
It's huge.
12 valves and common rails.
All of it, yeah.
NE,
Yeah.
6.0 power strokes, all of them. Good injectors are
Good
worth
injectors
the money.
make so much difference. You get like my old 12 valve, and that's ultimately one of the reasons I did not like driving it was it hazed a lot. Like start up, it would haze or whatever. I recently revived that build from a couple of years ago, and we stuck it next to Will's 1,000 horsepower 12 valve, and his starts up and is clean, way cleaner than my 700 horsepower 12 valve with components from 5 years ago. Like it's crazy, just like the technology, like it's like a pause in technology for 5 years, and then you like restart it up, and you're like, wow, like that's a huge difference. And then like from common rail standpoint too, like I had my old Shorty, I had a set of old injectors in that thing. And again, I ultimately stopped driving it because in the winter it was so hazy just until it warmed up. It was not, I did not enjoy it. I didn't want to sit there and let it warm up forever. And well, then with the new engine build, it's got new injectors with the newest technology from DDP, and they're just so much better. Like it is so much. Once I actually put a set of fun compounds back on it, it's going to be my daily again. Like, so healing components, like if anyone's ever wondering, should you go with like a standard injector or with something with like power jet technology, I would 100% get the power jet technology.
Especially if fuel economy is in your future, or you
Don't
want
even
clean
care.
running.
Even if it was the same mileage,
all the above.
clean mileage, like just everything about it just runs so much better. I drive my dad's truck because it's here, because we were mixing with turbo setups and whatnot. It's outrageous how fun. And that truck makes like probably almost 900 now. How clean and crisp it runs for being an almost 1,000 horsepower 12 valve.
Yeah.
At 5,800 feet. Like it is a blast to drive. It doesn't have the negative side effects of all those big big injection components and whatever it is. It's great. And it's at 18 degrees, making mid to high eights. I added fuel and I haven't dynoed yet, but it picked up power. So anyway, yeah.
So if somebody was, a home gamer and they're trying to, a little tidbit, they're trying to get their truck sorted out. What are you looking for on a truck when it's down? Like, for example, everybody's getting 20 miles a gallon and their truck's getting 12. What are you looking at really quickly? Just some quick checks.
I think
Make
the
sure
first
your brakes
test,
aren't dragging.
yeah. So first checks is to make sure the engine's healthy. You got fuel pressure, boost leaks, all that stuff is addressed and everything's working good. EGTs are a good indication. If you're pulling 1,100 degrees on flat ground, you probably got a problem. But past that, like, yeah, brakes dragging, bad U-joints, something's creating heat, and a heat gun will help you out a lot there.
So if you get done driving and the rear end is 400 degrees and the oil's boiling, there's something bad in there. It's probably where all of your loss is, or the brakes are on fire, or
your converter's not locking up.
yeah, the transmission gets really hot. So heat's a dead giveaway of things consuming energy. What about driving techniques a little bit? I mean, and maybe talk about something.
You gotta drive the way that none of us here do. Like, you go over that more, Will. I've never really cared that much about mileage.
So if you're really into it, you just read these hyper-miler forums. But the big gist of it is they're decelerating up the grades and accelerating down the hills on the backside.
Which I find offensive. To lose speed up a hill is awful. To downshift up a hill is awful. I will not do it ever.
But we have guys call in and ask, well, how do I gain fuel economy with my AFC Live on my 12 valve? And I say, well, if you cut the power back to like, let's say 150 horsepower with your AFC Live and you set the cruise control, it will automatically hypermile for you because you will not have enough power to pull your load up the hill. You'll be just like a semi. You're going to slow on the up, and then on the downhill, it's going to accelerate where the hill is helping you. And it's boring. It's not fun. But if you're trying to get fuel economy, that's essentially what you're doing. So you can either do it with your foot, or you can have an AFC Live, or have your custom tuner make you a toe tune that makes less power.
Which is the same thing. Yeah, it just limits your power, your US as they say, or whatever you want.
Microseconds. Yep.
Yeah.
Trying to coast, where you're using your brakes there. So, I mean, another quick thing, a lot of these guys, it's crazy. You get talking to guys that are really struggling with mileage. They let their truck warm up for 30 minutes in the morning before they go to work.
Dude, I
And
like
they
toasty
idle.
buns. Like I'm one of them.
But what do the OEMs do on these new vehicles? They do this auto shut off of the stupid traffic lights and stuff, you know?
You're letting it idle. You're losing.
Which on a side
losing
note,
fuel.
the auto shut-offs, like, don't people sometimes turn their car off down hills, like turn their engine off and coast down hills?
There's
like
crazy people doing that. Yeah, I've never been that crazy.
Don't do that with a turbo car. If you just climbed a hill and got your turbo hot and then turn it off and let that oil sit in that turbo, that's how you lose turbos. All the money you're saving in gas, you're going to lose on replacing turbos. And so,
I mean, these new cars that have the start-stop technology, they have coated bearings, like a race coating, because they're getting so many dry starts, they're wearing out the bearings. So all these starts are not good for your bearings. They're doing things to
it's not
do
good
it.
for. They say anybody who says like what percentage of engine damage happens upon startup? Like 90-some%. Like most of your engine damage happens when you start the dang thing.
Yeah.
So if you're in a cold climate and you start your truck, if you plug it in, you're saving fuel mileage. You're going to pay the electric bill to heat the engine, but you're not. That will save you your fuel bill. The final little tidbit I have.
Oh wait! Before you go final, I want to talk about one more thing. We get questions a lot about, methanol injection. That's something we hear a lot about. I'm sure people like to tear up about. Does water injection, methanol injection, is that a way to help mileage? Obviously, if you're paying for the methanol, it's a wash. But do you think there's actually a benefit, in dollars per mile?
I mean, we might as well add in natural gas and propane injection,
right?
All on this topic.
All I can speak on is propane injection. When we played with it back on the farm, there like towing, there was no. We could not. You get a little bit better mileage, yes, but when you start factoring in the cost of the propane, it was basically a wash. And then, like, I think anyone that has a benefit and is able to actually pick up enough mileage, it actually pays for the propane plus some or whatever they're using plus some. They just need timing. Like that's the answer. Is they just need timing. Because if you have a more faster burn gas in there that can get the diesel all going sooner to where it's like helping. That's all you're doing is you're just making that burn faster. And that's kind of what pilot jets are doing is those two small little jets in there are getting that burn to happen, getting some heat in the cylinder so the rest of the fuel can burn as it's being injected.
So yeah, I 100% agree that if the cost of the injectable is factored in, it's almost a wash and generally not worth the hassle. The only one argument I've seen some of the natural gas guys, when you used to be able to buy that for $1 for a gallon equivalent, in BTUs, that was a pretty good savings. It was worth it. But you have to have these really expensive tanks
and
that
the whole
are
system. How long does that take to pay for itself?
It probably is like 100,000 miles. I mean, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
The waste motor oil, those guys, it's such a dirty, messy thing. The black diesel guys doing that. It does save money. It's illegal if you're not paying the road tax on it. So I guess technically the propane and the natural gas are illegal if you're getting it from your home. Yeah. You're filling up your natural gas at home with some pump compressor system or something. So
the real way to save money is, I remember some guys did this on like the Diesel Power Challenge years ago. They put in a tiny nitrous jet to keep the turbo spooled, and they got the best fuel economy. And as we all know, nitrous is really affordable. So if you're looking to save some money, just hook up a nitrous system and keep that gas consumption down.
But essentially, anytime black smoke is coming in your tailpipe, you are not getting the full burn out of the fuel that you could have otherwise. Mm-hmm. My little thing, because every vehicle is a little bit different, is I tell people, if you have an EGT gauge, however you can cruise and make the EGT the lowest is your best fuel economy. The reason why is it takes energy to heat that exhaust. And so the less heat that's coming out of the exhaust, that means more of whatever you're burning went into the engine. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of like my little go, no go, and obviously you're just going to start slowing down. You're like, I don't want to drive at 45. Well, so then
you good mileage.
You speed up. So,
and so just quickly, I want to go back to the timing issue, which would, it does cool exhaust. Why does increased timing reduced exhaust gas temperature?
It's because more of the burn is happening in the cylinder. And so there's less burn happening on the exhaust stroke because it's going out across the turbine wheel. And because there's less energy, there's a little bit less, back pressure there on the turbo. Your boost drops a little bit with advanced timing. So there's a little bit less, intercooler load and
pumping
losses.
Like that,
pumping losses.
There's also a lot of just the physics of the way the internal combustion engine works with, you want peak pressure to happen a certain time. Like, cause the pressure, people think, well, it's under pressure the same the whole way the piston down. It's not. If you actually record the piston and the pressure in the cylinder, it's a quick spike and a quick drop. So you want that huge spike to happen at a certain time, right?
Yeah, usually they say about 15 degrees after top dead center.
Gas, diesel, anything, just the leverage on the piston.
Right
and the
there.
rod.
And that's not where you have the most leverage on the crank, but that's where they found that you get the most, bang for the buck. And so on a stock application, if it only has, let's say 12 to 13 degrees of timing, I mean, common rails are even lower in some cases. When they're trying to spool the turbos, they might be spraying at zero timing, right?
Factory tuned, yeah, you can be cruising down the highway at 0.
Yeah, which means it's injecting at the very top of the stroke.
And so if you're trying to get that burn to happen 15 degrees, that means you have 15 degrees of injection for that thing to even start, like to fully burn. And that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But you have to play with the timing. It depends on the size of the injectors and what they are. A power jet, part of why it gains so much without you even mess with the stock timing is it starts burning earlier. It's almost like advancing the timing without doing it slightly. And so that's, another thing I'll tell guys, I was like, it's a pain to always change your timing up and down and test. I'll tell them to put some power service or cetane additive in there. If you get a fuel mileage increase with some cetane additive, which makes the diesel burn faster, that means you don't have enough timing in there. I'm not saying run additives all the time because that's not cost effective, but for an easy test without actually changing, unless you're a computer controlled truck, then you just obviously just dial up more timing. But if you're mechanical injection timing, where it's a little bit of a pain to set your timing.
But I will say,
additive.
I said this before in another podcast that the timing you want in a 12 valve is not the same timing you want in a common rail. I tuned my first common rail like I was tuning a 12 valve, and it was hazy and it didn't get good mileage. It's because they burn so much faster. You don't need the timing in a common rail that you do need in a 12 valve because of the speed of the burn from the atomization and all those things.
And there's a lot, like when it comes to common rails, like when I said we'd go back and talk about common rail tuning, and I'm going to do it really quick before we finish up here because I got to do it. I told you I would. I did some testing. I was trying to figure out like towing mileage. I was like, I stuck my truck on the dyno for like a full weekend, and I made a bunch of 150 horsepower tunes, and I made it so at 20% throttle, I was at full power, and all it did when I gave it more throttle was vary the timing and then vary different aspects of the injection event. That way I could just give it more or less throttle, and I could see on the dyno how much power it's making. And I played with all sorts of different things, different combinations, whatever, see what would make the most power for that given amount of fuel, because that should be the best efficiency, best mileage. And I'm not saying I learned a lot, but there was a good amount of data there. But injection pressure and timing both make a huge effect on the mileage you get. And that was a VGT truck, so I was playing with the vanes and stuff as well to kind of see where they wanted to be. There's a lot, but
it's hard because you tighten up the vanes, you're increasing the back pressure, which is bad, but you're increasing the boost, which might change the characteristics of how the fuel's burning.
And it's a compound truck, so it gets even deeper. So it's very specific to my build in a way for that one specific example. But yeah, injection pressure is huge. There was a couple different minds of thought there where, like, yes, injection pressure helps the burn, but you're also having to drive that CP3 and you're using power to make that pressure. So is it enough? Yep. Dropping injection pressure definitely lost a little mileage there. And I did that on the road too, just as a double check. And yeah, when I had a couple different tunes, I did the same trip, and more injection pressure generally got better mileage. There was like a diminishing returns point to where I kind of like went to the base of that. That way I'm not making a bunch of pressure going down the highway, wearing everything out. But
because that high pressure is hard on the injection
it's
long term. It's just
everything, more work. So it's like, it's not worth the, 0.1 miles per gallon or whatever. But
I mean, it's kind of like running your tires down the road at 100 PSI and they're all crowned up. It's going to wear the tread out, but you probably get excellent fuel mileage. It'll ride like crap, but eventually that tire's going to blow out. They don't want to be ran down the highway at 100 PSI.
Yeah.
Seems like your injectors, they don't be run down the highway at 30,000 PSI constant.
So ultimately, I guess going back to common rail tuning, like professionals that do this for a living, they have a lot of data from that. And there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just simple as like changing a couple numbers in a table. There's a whole ramp of what timing you want at different loads and RPMs and everything else. And there's a lot of research that goes into that, like trying to figure out what combination is going to get the best timing, especially on a generic. Like I did mine on my truck, and so I kind of have it custom tuned for that application. you can't do that on every single truck. And so you have to figure out what's going to work good on most trucks. And yeah, so it can definitely make a big difference, and how you set that up makes a good difference.
Very cool. Very interesting. Well, I think that's going to kind of wrap this episode, guys. I kind of think I got my 2 items I know about for getting fuel mileage in. You guys, the mileage whizzes, forgot all your stuff, man. However you want to have fun with your vehicle. Some people have fun getting mileage. That's great. I make fun of it, but really, I think it's cool. Anything that's interesting to you is worth pursuing. So if mileage is your game, hopefully you learn something here, and hopefully you can figure out how to make some power at the same time, because that's always more fun. So anyway, if you have any questions, let us know, or any ideas for future podcasts. We're down to here. Thanks a lot, and we will see you guys next time.
Thanks.